On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
There is no just reason to treat the wife's contribution to the farm as any less significant than the husband's.
Bora Laskin.
That's some of the soundtrack from a scene in a brand new Heritage Minute video about the late Bora Laskin, one of the great legal minds in Canadian history, who also happened to be the first Canadian of Jewish faith ever appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1970, and who went on to be named Chief Justice, also the first and only Jewish jurist who ever held that position. The voice is Canadian actor Victor Garber, a veteran of Hollywood and the big screen, including the Titanic movie and TV shows like Alias and Family Law. Even though Garber didn't know much about Laskin at first, he said he was keen because of his own Jewish upbringing in London, Ontario. Bora Laskin was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants to Fort William, now called Thunder Bay. He was born more than a century ago in 1912. A Jewish youth leader and a talented athlete, his family home backed onto the local synagogue. And although money was tight, being during the Depression in the 1930s, his family scrimped to send him to university in Toronto, where Laskin came top of his class. He completed multiple degrees, including at Harvard, but once he was back in Toronto and a newly minted lawyer, doors to the prestigious law firms were closed to Jews. Antisemitism was widespread, so the legal scholar eked out a living writing and tutoring until he found a position teaching hundreds of budding young law students at the U of T, where that law library now bears his name. In the mid-1960s, Laskin was appointed as a judge in the Ontario provincial system, and 5 years later, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau named him to the Supreme Court of Canada. It's believed Laskin's dissenting ruling on a case called Murdoch versus Murdoch, which is featured in the film, paved the way for matrimonial law reforms across the country and likely got him the Chief Justice job, despite him being a relative newcomer and among the youngest on the court.
What I want people to do is learn something if they don't know anything about this incredible man. And yes, he happened to be a proud Jewish Canadian. So we're going to highlight and feature and talk about that.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
I was telephoned in London, England, where I was on a holiday in August of 1965, and asked whether I would be interested in the appointment of the Court of Appeal. You could have knocked me over with the proverbial feather. I had no indication, no sense at all that I was going to be approached for appointment to the bench.
Our producer Andrea Varsany dug up this interview. It's the real Bora Laskin speaking back in 1976. The new Laskin Heritage Minute is the work of a private history body called Historica Canada. Canadian philanthropist Charles Bronfman founded these brief vignettes over 30 years ago, and of the 100 episodes that have been produced to date, Laskin's is only the second time a Jewish Canadian has been featured. The team says the Laskin children did approve the final script, which pays tribute to their father's towering legal contribution to justice in Canada, whether it was the marital property rights for women case or overturning the Lord's Day Act, which forced businesses in Ontario to stay closed on the Sundays, or abolishing restrictive covenants, which prevented Jews, including him, and minorities from buying property in certain areas of the country. Laskin even had a role in developing Canada's Constitution and Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1981, but he died of pneumonia in 1984 at the age of 71, before his court ever dealt with any charter challenge cases. Playwright Sam Rosenthal was thrilled to have been selected to tell Laskin's story. He also has an acting cameo in the film as one of the judges clashing with Laskin's progressive views. Sam Rosenthal joins me now.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and it's thrilled to finally meet you in person.
Yes, because we've covered your amazing play on the Christie Pits and your podcast on the Christie walking tours. All of that happened before October 7th. So how did it happen that you got to do the Heritage Minute about Bora Laskin?
Well, first of all, let me say that, talking about the Honorable Bora Laskin is, it's an incredible thing, number one, just to be talking about this trailblazer, this historic man, the 14th Chief Justice, the first Jewish justice to serve. That's incredible. So just talking about him. Now, you add the layer that when I looked at the application, it's very daunting. Anyway, we looked at the application, and I contacted a Jewish director that I knew and that I know, Charles Wall. And I met Charles in Halifax, and we did a movie together, a short film called The Moil.
That's a horror movie, wasn't it? A horror movie? It was.
No, only for the mothers. Anyway, we all fill out this application. We go through the process. Now, we applied with the Christie Pits riot. I wanted the minute, when we didn't know it was about Bora Laskin, we took our passion for the Christie Pits riot. I did my spiel to those guys, and they said, Sam and team, this was great. No, we're not going to do a minute about a riot. Canada's not going to celebrate that. I said, okay, I respect that. What are you looking for? They said, come back again. You're shortlisted, you and I think 6 other teams, for Bora Laskin. I did know who Bora Laskin was because I met him. I met him through my mother years ago. He came to our house for a party, and I remember my mother saying, this is Bora Laskin, and this elegant gentleman, soft-spoken. I was a young pisher. It's very nice to meet you. And my mother said, do you know who this is? And I said, no, I don't know who this is back then.
Wait, how did your mother know Bora Laskin? Why?
Well, my mother, may she rest in peace, was a mover and shaker. She ran an art gallery in Yorkville. And so she had these events at our house, and it was very she, and she had all these. And so we just happened to be having a party. It could have even been a Hanukkah party one year, and there he was. So years later, here we are. We're talking about Bora Laskin. We had to go away and obviously do a lot of research. And more importantly than the research, it is how are you going to tell a story in a minute? And it's got to look and feel like a film and someone's life in a minute. As if people have not seen a Canadian Heritage Minute, please do yourself a favor and look them up. They're extraordinary. We all grew up with them. And just like I'm talking to you now with this type of truthful passion, mine was, what was it like for him to go to school in the 30s in University of Toronto at the height of antisemitism? I was fascinated. How does someone rise from that? And how did he make it through? How was that possible?
Bora Laskin says he was among the top of his class at Harvard Law. He's a Jew. But he's not one of those flashy Jews.
No.
You know, my grandfather, he wanted to get in to become a doctor. He couldn't. The quotas were filled. He had to become a pharmacist.
Right, and the U of T Medical School a couple of years ago apologized for the quotas that it put on Jewish people. We know, I've written about it myself. But I wasn't aware that law schools also had quotas. And you're saying maybe that wasn't a thing, or it was?
There may not have been the hardcore quotas, but you better believe there was, and we feature it in a minute. I don't want to give too much away, but we talk about the fact that it was not the easiest thing for a young Jewish man to, go to law school. And he was at the top of his class. I mean, he was at the top of his class. Everything that I've read about his honor is the fact that here is a guy with class. There was no complaining about anti-Semitism. There was no talking about woe is me and look what was done to me. He was helping people. Everything we researched was about his contributions, his work ethic, his positive ongoing attitude. I mean, it's tough to write a 1-minute cliffhanger when you're looking for the emotional catch. You want to root for him, right? So where was the catch? What did he struggle against? Well, he struggled against a lot.
For our neighbors, Bora, We should always do what we can. It's our responsibility.
So we know he grew up in what is now called Thunder Bay. And we know that he came from a loving home, and we know that he had a great childhood and that he was protected in this community. So as a young Jewish man, those are all great things. He comes to Toronto. He is experiencing Toronto through the riots. I'm not claiming that he was here in Toronto at the riots. I'm saying through school, through those times he was here. We know that, for example, he had to join one of the Jewish fraternities. Maybe by choice, I hope.
Was he a Sami? He was a Sami.
Yeah.
A lot of people in that, my grandfather too was a Sami, Sigma Alpha Mu.
Yeah, and that came back to obviously help him when he went out to article, and he got his first articling assignment through a fellow Jewish practitioner who said, look, I've just started myself, but you're going to have to, to disturb articles, and I'm going to help you out.
Why? Because he couldn't get an article in the Toronto Protestant type firms?
Correct. And I want to be clear, as there is some varying research on did he apply, didn't he apply, was there an issue? We had to talk to several sources. So what I'm going to comment on is that we know for a fact that anyone who was Jewish in the 30s who then from school went out looking for work, well, you're going to have a problem. We know that he faced a hostile environment where Jewish people were not welcome in many places, and you had to push through. And he pushed through with zeal and charm, and continued to educate himself, and did not take a traditional, he didn't practice in the court per se, right? I mean, he became known for labor law, and he was always known as the dissenting judge, the man who was going to stand up for women's rights. A huge decision for women's rights, Murdoch versus Murdoch. It's a great case.
The husband has legal title to the farm properties. I see no reason to entertain the wife's appeal any further.
If I may, I find there are in fact many reasons, both legal and moral.
Why did you pick that one instead of so many other ones?
We took that one because we are looking for the moment. What can we reach out with a couple lines from a case that can grab people who do not know Bora Laskin, who do not understand legalese? This particular case talked about a woman who was married and contributed on her farm with her husband, and when they separated, back in those days, the husband would take everything. And, there was an argument in court in this one that, listen, this woman worked and contributed equally. And the Honorable Bora Laskin said, yes, in fact, she is entitled to property. She is entitled. And I don't know. I mean, we had lots to pick. We felt that it just resonated. That, for a man to be defending women, to be defending Indigenous people, years ago, it just spoke volumes.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Tell me a little bit about the behind the scenes. Where was it filmed?
All shot in Toronto.
And the chambers, where were that?
The chambers were shot down at the Historica building, downtown. It's a gorgeous old building. And of course, we got Victor Garber. Now, that's no small thing to do when you're shooting a 1-minute thing. You got to get him in. He's in New York, and you got to bring him in. And what a charming, elegant, delightful man. And I mean, does he look like Bora Laskin? It's eerie.
Why did he want to do it? Did you ask him?
We did ask him. He was like, Bora who? I'll do my research. I'm very excited to know this. But we know that, Victor is someone who's proud Canadian, and we want to honor that in there. And it was just someone that we thought would be a great fit for the team.
So he's not Jewish?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. See, there you go.
Right.
Okay. And then What about the other actors or any of the cast? I have to ask.
You have to ask, and that's why my name is front and center in terms of the writing. They want to be very clear that Sam Rosenthal is very proud. But I have to say that without my co-writer, Drew Carnwath, I'm not doing it because we're a team. However, they're very respectful and wanted to make sure that we had a Jewish director and we had a Jewish writer, and that the team, that we had at least 2 or 3 Jewish actors within that. And especially in a scene with a bunch of judges, and there's only one Jewish judge in the room, but there were 3 of us that were Jewish that played judges. The Historica team are so, in a good way, so tough. 14 passes at the script. 14. They care so much about the work that every word, every an old menorah, everything has been vetted, looked at, triple checked. It's incredible.
So there's a menorah fully lit for Hanukkah, the 8th night of Hanukkah, and there's candles on the table and a challah. Can you explain what that is?
Great question.
Because, we're going to be sticklers about this, right?
There was some, how do we say this? There was some discussions about how Jewish his upbringing was, okay? So the problem was we needed to establish he's in a Jewish home. He's in a Jewish upbringing, right? But we understood that, in fact, did they wear kippahs all the time? Did they not wear kippahs? What was the upbringing? What were we going to do? We wanted to do the Shabbos meal, just the Shabbos meal. But then it was felt that there might have been confusion on what that was. So could we please do Hanukkah? It may have been just the way they wanted the shot to look. The significance is, if you're not a Jew and you're watching this and you need to understand what kind of home this is, in 3 seconds, you understand.
And what about this one here? What rally is this?
So at when Hitler was elected over in Germany, what people don't understand was it was impacting Toronto here. There were youth rallies. There were terrible things happening on the beaches. There were young men with Nazi paraphernalia marching up and down. There was rally here at Maple Leaf Gardens. There was a rally here in Toronto. It's in the paper. You can look it up.
Like fascist rallies.
Correct. And that's what we were mimicking. In that moment, we wanted people to understand, again, in a 2-second screen pass, that that's what he's dealing with in the 30s in Toronto. That's the anti-Semitism. And people who say, oh, it probably wasn't so bad. There were fascist rallies in Toronto. So it wasn't Elon Musk doing his ridiculous thing that people could put on social media. These were packed places where there was a lot of scary people shouting a lot of hate. That's what was happening in Toronto at the time.
This is Jewish Heritage Month, landing after October 7th, second year after October 7th. And I'm wondering what you think the impact is going to be of this film.
I know my father would want me to say my hope is that people will see that we are telling a story of a culture at a time where it is a tough gig to be a Jewish person right now. I'm hoping that people will see this 1 minute and understand that there was a compassionate, wonderful, intelligent Chief Justice of Canada who blazed the way. He was the first Jewish judge. That's why we're doing the minute. But what's even more important was this man was compassionate, a defender of women, a defender of rights, a trailblazer. That's what I want people to see. Let's look for the good in people. Let's celebrate the good. Because, just before my father died, he looked at me and said, I don't recognize the world. I don't recognize the world. So
I ask this because when the Christy Pitts Heritage Minute was done by Historica Canada, and we covered it, and the hate comments that were on our YouTube channel from neo-Nazis and anti-Israel people and anti-Semites, and this is long before October 7th. This was like 3 years before. We had to close the comments because it was so disgusting. So I'm very worried about this. I hope that people will take the message that you hope that this intends, and Historica Canada too.
We are concerned, but we are going forward proudly with what we've shot to say we were asked to do this minute. We are honored to be chosen to do this minute. And we hope And we hope that Bora's family and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and people who are associated with him will be proud of what they see. It's not an easy gig to do anything related to Jewish culture. But I think we all have, without being overly dramatic, as someone who is Jewish, who is living in Toronto, we all have a responsibility right now. And artistically, this is how I'm going to continue to tell stories and to share my passion for Jewish culture.
Besides the fact that you met him, when you were 9 in your parents' house, what's the one thing that you learned about Bora Laskin that you were surprised or stays with you today after having gone through this whole process?
That despite the odds being, placed in a position to become a Chief Justice over someone else who was older and had more experience, and, he continued to stay out of the muck and just continued to work and move forward. And that was the theme, is the more I researched him, you just couldn't find people who wanted to speak ill of him, because he was someone who was continually working in the interests of others. And I just find it incredible, given from the times that he came from. That, and the fact that he was always the dissenting judge, never afraid to go for truth, never about politics, never about pleasing others. He was always there to look at the truth of the situation and defend those who could not defend themselves.
Good luck when it launches. I can't wait to hear the feedback.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bora, your desire to ignore the legal precedent is preventing us from moving forward in this.
Moving forward is precisely what I believe we must do.
Bora Laskin's niece, Shelley Laskin, is a Toronto School Board trustee and was very close to her uncle. At a reception to officially launch the short vignette about him, Shelley Laskin came prepared with the words printed on his grave, words that she said inspire her work today.
I think it says that no matter where you come from or the adversities that you face, you can become great. And you can instill in young people that all the adversity out there, keep true to yourself and your beliefs, and you just need to believe in your own abilities and not be afraid. Like, my favorite thing about my uncle was his dissents, that he was never afraid to go with what he felt was just and be prepared to be the dissenting opinion. And those dissents really influenced the law, and the law caught up to his dissents. And he has an amazing quote on his tombstone that I just live by. I have no expectations to live up to save those that I place upon myself. I have no constituency to serve save the realm of reason. No influences to dispel unless there is a threat to my intellectual disinterestedness. I have no one to answer to save my conscience and my personal sense of integrity.
That's a long quote.
And that's on the back of his tombstone. And when I visit, my father's grave is very near my uncle's grave, and it was kind of nice that the brothers and my other uncle Chuck, the 3 brothers, are all at the old Holy Blossom Cemetery reunited.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The Laskin Minute is on YouTube already, and we've put the link in our show notes to watch it. Historica Canada says it'll also be shown on 70-plus TV stations, especially during the NHL playoffs. This episode of our show was produced by Andrea Varsany, along with our team of Zachary Judah Kaufman and the executive producer, Michael Freeman. And the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.